Dave, this is a big thrill. You know, the team that sucked me into this whole Cubs nightmare, the 1969 Chicago Cubs. My
World Series champions, right?
Shut up. Today we're going to talk about that team, that team that we all still love. We're going to hear from the catcher of those 1960s Cubs, Randy Hundley, and his co-author, John St. Augustine, a longtime broadcaster, podcaster, and writer, and all that is it's almost too much for one show, but here it comes. It's Minutia Men Celebrity Interview.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
So we have John St. Augustine on the line, but before we get to him, let's hear a little bit from the subject of this book. The book is called Iron Man, and it's all about Randy Hundley.
Hello, I'm Randy Hundley, and I'm here to tell you this book is a long time coming. Over the years, I've watched my former Chicago Cubs teammates share their experiences between the covers of a book, especially the 1969 Cubs. The stories have kept our team in the headlines for the past 54 years, ever since we lost to the Miracle Mets. We've been called lovable losers and the greatest second-place team in baseball history, which I suppose is true on some level, but there is so much more to that time than our deep dive at the end of the year. I've always wanted to share my memories from my years in the game, and I'd been waiting until the time felt right. When I turned 80 years old in 2022, I figured it was getting to the now or never point to tell the story. I reached out to my longtime friend and best-selling author, John St. Augustine, and asked him to help me put on paper what has long been on my mind and in my heart. Big John attended our Wrigley Field fantasy camp back in 1993 and hit a grand slam, which he's been living off of ever since. And I don't care about reporting that, but that's the case. And I knew I could trust him to help me share my experiences in the most authentic way possible. My journey has taken me, a 17-year-old kid, from Little Bassett High School in Virginia to the majors as a catcher with the San Francisco Giants, Cubs, Twins, Padres, and back home to Chicago to finish my career. Along the way, I earned a coveted Gold Glove Award, became an All-Star, and spent time with some of the greatest players and characters the game has ever known.
It's Randy Hundley, one of my favorite players when I was a kid. And John St. Augustine is here with us now. And, you know, we're going to get to that fantasy camp grand slam, John. I'll let you tell that story.
Which has been told so many times through CNN. And
hey, man, I'm still getting beers off that 30 years later. So,
but let's start with that 69 Cubs team. Randy Hundley, key member of that team. He caught 151 games that year. There's a reason why his book is called Iron Man. Talk to us about his importance to that team.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really enjoy what you guys do. And it's, you know, when you get a chance to talk baseball, Chicago Cubs baseball, in this city with the great history that it has, to be able to contribute a small piece, that is just a thrill. And of course, to hear his voice, which, by the way, is the intro of the audiobook version, hopefully to be out on his 83rd birthday on June 1st.
Oh, okay, great.
So we're pushing towards that. And I got to tell you, it was a bit of a struggle to get him. His health has not been great, as a lot of these aging heroes, have to face these challenges. So to get him to do that was a monumental chore, but he did a great job. And along the lines of being our Iron Man, he pushed through that stuff when I could have had somebody like, Rick Kempfer read it, something like that.
Could have.
Right? You could not afford Rick Kempfer.
Well, that's true, too. I actually thought about it, Dave, and I thought, I can't effing afford this guy.
Yeah. And with Rick's gout and stuff, and his elephantitis, he's not going to.
Right.
He wouldn't have but a broken limb here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Randy, of course, as the book alludes to, that he in that era of the 60s, and I got to say this before Johnny Bench came along, a year after Randy broke in, he was the man in the National League for sure. You know, he was the guy who was the first catcher ever to do it one-handed behind the plate because of his dad. In 1968, he caught 160 out of a 162 game season. No one will ever break that.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. And all day games too at home, right? Yeah.
All day games. And one of the challenges he would say when we were working on the book was the great challenge back then was, you know, to do this at Wrigley where it would be unbearably hot during the summer, and then to have to go fly to LA or whatever, and then your body clock doesn't hardly reset itself, and continue that streak was monumental. So out of a 162 game season in 68, he caught 160 games, holds the record. It'll never be broken. Yeah, so I think that's one part of his Iron Man status. But the other piece of this is the way that team came together with these stars that were kind of already there until he got there in 66. You had Ron Santo and Ernie Banks, and of course Beckert was come along, and all these pieces were there. They needed a really good catcher. The catcher is the spark plug of any team. It is the most difficult position. I played a little bit in college and, of course, at the fantasy camp.
Don't worry, we're gonna let you tell the Grand Slam. All right, just hold on. All right.
Hey, Dave, did I mention I played at the fantasy camp?
Oh, okay. Jesus, yes.
Oh, for the long one now is what I'm saying. So anyway, you know, it's a very difficult position. So even though the game has changed in so many ways since then, back then, to be the field general installed by Leo DeRocher, the confidence that gave him, even though DeRocher rode him like a horse every day, it was a pivotal piece. The way he handled the pitchers, he had a decent batting average. He caught all those games. He was the guy that you could always look to. While the other, you know, pretty much everybody played every day, but it was Randy Hundley who we kind of heard the most of from behind the plate.
Yeah. You know, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned Ernie, you mentioned Billy and you know, Ron Santo, Billy Williams, Ernie Banks. You had Fergie Jenkins. I mean, those are four Hall of Famers right there.
I know, yeah.
What was his relationship like with those four? Were they all, you know, I want to think even as a cynical Sox fan, they hung out, and I don't know, did they all get along? Was this a real camaraderie?
Well, start with Fergie it is, right? Let's go right down the list. You know, Fergie, and I think Randy will tell you, as will Fergie, as will Rich Nye and the rest of the guys that are around that caught, you know, had Randy catching them. You know, you had to have that trust, and nothing else mattered except that. They worked off that. Now, all of these guys, Fergie's a Canadian. He honed his skills throwing pieces of coal at train cars in Chatham, Ontario. A little different than Randy going up in Virginia, you know, being the golden boy back then. So these guys really had to put their cultural differences aside and find common ground. They did that in great form. Randy and Fergie still friends to this day. Santo and he's, you know, he was always down third base. He was at Randy's left arm there, and he always talked about how much he respected Ron Santo for playing through the diabetes when no one even knew he had it. He didn't even announce it till many years later. But he talked about him being the captain, and that, you know, when Ronnie passed in 2010, Randy was actually on his way out to play golf with him. He's very devastated by that. And then you go down the list and you look at Billy Williams, you know, and my God, you know, he's another Iron Man that played over 2,000 games, I believe, out in right field and all the things that he did. And then everybody, of course, with Ernie. I mean, come on, man. I mean, he was like, when I got to the majors and I was able to come to the Cubs, Randy would tell me I wanted to get Ernie's autograph every day. Yeah. So amazing. It's that kind of relationship.
Well, you know, and even as a cynical White Sox fan, I still love Ernie Banks.
Yeah, nobody
hates
Ernie exactly
Banks,
right.
You can't.
So, you know,
well, you know, the thing real quick, the thing I think I appreciated most while, you know, doing work on this book was doing obviously the background stuff. And a lot of these names we know at face value. Ron Santo, Ernie Banks, Billy was but when I went into their backgrounds and how they ended up there, which is not a lot in the book, but they did become part of that team. The thing that always impressed me with Ernie Banks is, you know, this wasn't a Barry Bonds-sized guy.
Right.
He had such quick wrists and such a turnaround on those balls that he was launching line drives into left field long before there was a thing called launch angles, you know?
Yeah.
So I really appreciated what his ability was to hit those well over 512 home runs just with his wrists, much like Henry Aaron.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned that they all came from different places, too. Like Fergie is Canadian, Billy Williams from Alabama, you know, Ron
Whistler,
Santo
Alabama.
from Washington State.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're from all over the place, and somehow they managed to be friends.
I think a lot of ways, as odd as this sounds, because you'll find lovers and haters of DeRocher equally, and I think Randy falls into that category. Somehow DeRocher, I think by him chewing on everybody's ass, they all became equal. Yeah. Nobody was given favoritism, and before that, it was a little bit different. So even though DeRocher, I don't know if he actually, I hate to say, he knew what he was doing. Maybe it was, subliminal that if he chewed on them all, they'd all hate him and not each other. I don't know.
Yeah, but, I think there's probably part of that is true.
Yeah.
That one of the things they bonded on was their hatred of him.
They all hated the guy, I'm telling you, to a man, up and down the line. And, there was a comparison I put in the book that he was kind of like baseball's Vince Lombardi.
Yeah.
I mean, he was able to extract things out of players they didn't know they have. Lombardi did the same. Of course, they didn't win as much as the Packers did, but the fact of the matter is I think there was a similarity there.
So, it's hard to describe how huge those 69 Cubs were. They even came out with a record, which sort of foreshadows the Bears Super Bowl shuffle. And I actually have it, of course, in my collection.
You do, yeah.
I want to play a little clip of it here.
Oh, boy.
Shut up, Dave.
Hey, hold it back, girl. No doubt about it. The Cubs are on their way. The Cubs are gonna pitch today. They're gonna hit today. They're gonna
it's the Cubs singing. Really?
Come on, Dave, sing along.
Now, we all know that song, but they did release that song. Yeah. And those guys, those were the Cubs singing.
Yeah.
Nate Oliver, Willie Smith, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, Don Kester, Hundley, and Gene Oliver. Now, Gene Oliver put the whole thing together. He was a serial entrepreneur, this guy. I knew him a little bit before he passed. He was at the baseball camp I played. Did I mention in 1993? Yeah.
But let me ask you this about that song, though.
Yeah.
Did they think that they were jinxing things when they recorded it?
I don't think they gave it I don't think they even gave it a second thought. I think Gene Oliver came up with an idea. He found this guy, Peter Wright, to produce it, and they felt it was like a bumper sticker. They just did it for fun. I don't think any of them thought that it would be, one way or the other, good or bad.
Yeah, or that some 62-year-old guy would own it in his collection right now.
Rick has like 8 different versions of it. This is the way.
Would you like to hear the Extendo Dance remix?
Yeah. Is this where you include yourself in it? And you kind of leave? Yeah, okay. Nice.
Now, who sang the "Let's Go Batter Up"? We're taking the century off. Remember that one? Let's go batter up. We're taking this.
I don't remember that.
All right. So
it's an obscure. Okay.
So when I'm thinking, when I think of the '69 season, which quite frankly, I'm not thinking all that often about it, to be honest with you. But I do that famous shot, when Randy was jumping up and down at home plate.
Oh my gosh.
Angry with the ump, missed a call. Can you talk about that play? Because it's so iconic and and has he gotten over it yet, I guess is really the question.
Well, the quick answer is he'll never get over it. He'll be on the other side of Valhalla and still be saying, he was out. But it's interesting because when we started doing, real quick on the audiobook process or the book process in general, we would go to breakfast or lunch or what have you, and then we go back to his house, start talking. And I would turn on the machines and he would converse. And the first thing he brought up was that play. Because he knows that's what he's asked about most. Even to this day, all these years later, we would go out, as I mentioned, and somebody'd say, "Randy, what did you think about the play?" And he'd say, "Stop." He was blooming out. He was out of here. And he's insistent that had there been replay back then, it's not even a question. And it's hard to tell by the pictures, but I kind of, got to agree with him. But he was talking about that play being like the definitive moment in his mind that things were going to go south, that the breaks were no longer going their way. And, the next night, of course, was the whole thing of the one hitter with Seaver. And they started singing, hey, take a hike, DeRocher. And he said there was something about this trip to Shea that play itself almost was a foreshadowing of that the Mets were going to go all the way. And the Cubs would not recover from that slide, which was indicative of that play at the plate.
Was that the same series that the Black Cat appeared?
That was the next night. So the Fever game was the Black Cat game. Yeah, and I, quite frankly, just in deference to Mr. Hundley's vocabulary, which is always, there's no swear words whatsoever.
Right.
I kind of changed what Ron Santo actually said just for the reader's benefit. So Santo dropped quite a string of verbal, let's say, dodge and parry in an interesting way, and we kind of shucksed it up.
Okay, that's hard. It's hard to believe a young Italian.
I know
man
think Randy would. Yeah.
Well, speaking about not getting over something, let's talk about Milt Pappas.
Oh boy,
because I know Randy was the catcher for Milt's no hitter in 1972, and didn't he also catch the Bert Hooton one?
He did. He's one of 5 catchers that have caught 2 no hitters in the same season.
Amazing. Until his dying day, Milt Pappas believed that he was screwed by the umpire's call on a 3-2 pitch in the 9th inning. Would have been a perfect game, and he had to settle for a no-hitter. And I'm telling you, I've met him a number of times. He was honestly bitter about it. Like, he really hated that umpire. I think, what was his name? Fremming?
Bruce Fremming.
Bruce Fremming. So, Randy as the catcher, where does he stand on that call? Was Milt correct? Was that a strike?
I don't think you'll ever hear Randy not back up one of his pitchers, and he's never come out and said it one way or the other, except for the fact that he feels, which is a little different. We talk about it in the book. He feels that he saved even Milt from being tossed in the game, because on the batter before the last out that Fan Zone caught, Fremming was going to toss Pappas. Pappas made a couple of moves to the mound, running his mouth. Fremming, I think, was just a second or third year ump. He was fairly new to the game, and would go on to be one of the more hated umpires in baseball history.
Yeah.
But Fremming's like, listen, Randy, if you don't settle him down, he's out of here and you're going to lose everything. So Randy looked more out of it as like, I saved him from getting kicked out of the game than the actual saving the game itself kind of thing.
Did he have a favorite pitcher that he liked to work with?
I think if you ask him, Fergie, of course, is the guy. They spent more time together. I think Randy caught more of Fergie's games, who had an incredible, obviously, career than any other catcher that Fergie played with. So I think they have a real close connection that way. And, the interesting thing, and we talked about this before, Rick, you and I, he said the thing about pitching back then is you knew that a guy like Jenkins or Nye or fill in the blank, Kenny Holtzman, they're going to go 8 or 9 innings if at all possible. He said, so those are the guys you spent the most time with. When the relievers came in, he said it was always a little more difficult because they hadn't played as much together. So they kind of had to work their ways around that. And a lot of these guys were coming from other teams, Dick Selma was a Met and came to the Cubs just at the right time. So, yeah.
I think there's, we had mentioned the Super Bowl shuffle and the personality of the 85 Bears. This team had a lot of personalities. We had, of course, we talked a little bit about Leo DeRocher, Joe Pepitone, right?
Oh, jeez.
Right? I mean, I love Joe Pepitone. That's another one who's a cynical Sox fan. You're like, okay, I like that guy too. So they didn't get along from what I understand. DeRocher didn't really get along with anybody,
gosh.
right?
There were so many, we only have so much room. You guys know books. You can only put so much in.
Yeah.
But one of the favorite stories in the book that we did put in there that Randy talked about was whenever DeRocher barked at Randy, so he used Randy like as his errand boy, right? So if he didn't want, he'd go get so-and-so or go, and of course Randy had to do it. So he didn't like the way that Pepitone was hitting, and he's going to fix that. DeRocher's going to fix it was like May. He's going to fix it for the rest of the year. So he was convinced that Pepitone, because he had a motorcycle, was revving it up too much. It was hurting his wrist, especially his right wrist. So Pepitone would park his motorcycle outside of DeRocher's office when they were at Wrigley, wherever they could worm this thing in, and he would just sit there and rev it up on top of just going and going, just to piss off DeRocher. So he sends Randy to go get Pepitone, and first Randy thinks he's being traded. Then he's like, okay, I'm the errand boy. He finds Pepitone sitting in a bathroom stall smoking a joint. And
it was 69. Everybody was doing
exactly. You're just going to go out and do that stuff. And so it was things like that, and Pepitone admitted to drug use and things like that during his career. And he still had a great career. But, when I'm talking about Joe, and Randy lights up like a Christmas tree. He passed away while we were working on the book, even though he wasn't in that 69 team.
Yeah.
He said, Joe, when we get on the plane, we'd go to a road trip, and nothing would happen until Pepitone got on the plane. Then they were allowed to go and do their thing. He was quite a guy. And I met him a little bit at the baseball fantasy camp, as I recall.
We're getting there. All
right.
Good.
It's on my screen. It's just a couple of questions away. Just hold on, all right?
Fantastic.
But
yes.
I love what Randy said in his book about Joe Pepitone. they roomed together on the road occasionally, and Randy said he would do things that made a country boy blush.
Oh, yeah.
So those
some of that we couldn't put in the. I just telling you.
Yeah.
He would sit there. Randy would have a hard time telling me this stuff because he literally would blush all these years later. I'm just going to leave it at that.
I don't think players have that same sensibility now.
Randy would say, I saw things I can't unsee.
That's a very good Randy impersonation there, too. By the
Listen,
way.
I spent so much time with this guy over the years. I was looking through some of our old pictures and stuff like that, and I have it in my mind when I think of him, he would always talk about his fantasy camp. I'm just half kidding with that part. Yeah. But they had a phone number that was 991-925-925. And that's all I hear in my head when we go to lunch. I'm like, order up so I can hear in my head 99-925.
All right. Now, after his playing career, Randy became famous for his fantasy camp.
I've heard of those.
That has.
All right, I'm going to grab a sandwich. You guys continue. All right?
It has obviously been copied by a million people since then, but that was the first one. Tell us about the fantasy camp, and then please tell us about the Grand Slam home run.
Oh, okay. Appreciate it. So when Randy retired, he thought he was going to be a manager, and he was working his way up through the ranks of all that stuff, and they eventually cut him loose. It didn't work out, and that was the way it went. It was a very difficult time for him, and like a lot of athletes, right? It's over. What he did all these years is done, and he doesn't know what to do next. And unlike today, I should say, these guys all work off-season jobs, part-time jobs,
right? You
name it, they had to do it. So he had to figure out a way to feed his family and stuff like that. And in order to do that, he went back to work as a banker, which was something he had done in the off season, but he got approached by a neighbor to do kids' baseball camps, if it's possible, in Palatine, I think one of the colleges out there. And the guy says, what do you think about that? He says, it's a great idea. So they did it, and it took off. So for about a year, he did these kids' camps, and mostly they were signed up, by the parents who knew who he was. So after about a year this went on, and he's out to dinner with Rich Melman from Let Us Entertain You and another guy that was his partner at the time, and the concept came up about doing camps for adults. He said, do you think you could come out and we could get some adults and you can show us stuff? I'd like to say it in Randy's voice, but it's too long. But the bottom line, he says, well, I don't think I can do that. But what I can do is get a bunch of my former teammates out and bring them to Arizona and recreate spring training.
Okay.
Now that's had a moment. And that's kind of how it started. He floated the idea to a bunch of these guys, Santo, Becker, Banks, you name it, everybody on that 69 team, even Pepe and Oliver and all the rest of them, floated the idea. And half said, if you actually pull this off, let me know. And the other half said, where do I sign up? That first two camps, all the players that came in just played for expenses. They didn't get a dime. So they had to kind of get the thing down. And one of the cool things is after that first camp, which sold out, they did for about 8-9 years, they did 2 camps a year, January and then later in the year out in Mesa, Arizona. And after that first camp sold out, he got a hold of DeRocher and said, hey, would you and Steve Stoney, who was a White Sox, Dave, for a while, right?
Yeah,
so you okay with this? Okay, good. We got Steve Stone and Leo DeRocher to manage the pseudo 69 Cubs to play against the Campers. The Campers end up winning, which is almost never happens because the pros cheat all the time. And
really?
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing the stuff they did. But anyway, at the dinner, they always had like a banquet. At the banquet, DeRocher gets up, thanks all his former players for allowing him the chance to recreate what they had. And he went back like 12, 13 years before that when there was this huge incident that's in the book about Ron Santo Day and how that came around. And that Santo, went to the front office and made a big stink about it. And then Leo called him on it. It almost turned into a brawl. They were Santo wanted to choke DeRocher out.
Yeah.
DeRocher wanted to quit. And Randy says it was the worst clubhouse meeting he ever saw. So that's kind of how it started. And then just wash, rinse, and repeat. This thing got so big. He did it for other teams. I believe he did for the White Sox, a couple other ones. And then, as you mentioned, the sad part is I don't think he ever trademarked the whole thing. So as soon as it caught fire, other teams did their own deal.
Right.
And that's how it started.
He made some dough on this. I mean, I would imagine that this
he made serious cash.
Yeah, good.
Well, we talked to Carmen Fanzone once, who participated in those camps a lot, and he said they were just the most fun.
Yeah, they were just
the players just loved doing it.
Well, think about it. These guys had all gone to their second and third lives, and they get called back to be who they used to be, and they dress. You walk in there. So is it time for me to talk about the,
Yeah. Yep. It's
the
time.
Grand Slam.
Let's hear it.
Right. It's going to sound like we're hanging up, but we're really not. Okay. It's an audio glitch. Just don't worry about it.
I'll just keep talking. You can pick up later. So my first paid writing assignment, and I do not know how this happened. I wish I did. Rick, you may have remembered this magazine called Chicago Sports Profiles.
Yes, I do remember that.
Right? Early 90s stuff, long gone. Somehow I either talk them into or they talk me into playing in the camp. Now, at the end of the book, I wrote the afterword, and why this was such a big deal is I was one of those kids, like everybody else in Chicago, on the north side that would wait for these guys at certain corners to get autographs, and Randy Hundley was my guy. So there's a whole story in the back of the book about how that all transpired. So 23 years later, after that, I'm writing my very first paid assignment. They paid me $250 in 1993 to go play in Randy's fantasy camp, cover it for the magazine.
Wow, you got paid to do that. That's awesome.
Got paid $250. I was like a ball player. $250 to play for 3 days. The first 2 days we were at UIC Field, and the third day we're playing at Wrigley, not Mesa. So I'm thinking this is like the best thing ever. So I get to UIC, and you walk into the locker room, and there's, you're wearing the same jersey the guys wear. It's overwhelming a little bit. So the first 2 days we're playing there, and I was on Gene Oliver's team. He's a great guy. And, they put you through the paces, you have lunch, you do all this stuff, and it's literally like spring training. Now, this was, of course, here in Chicago, it wasn't in Mesa, but they do the same thing. They're poking at you constantly, yelling at you, all this kind of stuff. And you play a couple of games before you get to Wrigley. And when you get to Wrigley, you play a 7-inning game, and everybody kind of rotates because there had to be 50 guys there, probably something like that.
So you're like 30, what are you, like 34?
I was 33.
Okay.
33 when I played, yeah. You have to be over 30. And there were guys in their 70s and 80s, man. And I thought, I'd never seen anything like this. So we're playing on the Friday before the Saturday game, and we played, I can't which team we were playing against. And the guy throws me one right down the middle. I hit it on the screws, and the ball screamed out of the park. Bases loaded. Get the F out. Oh, for the long one now. See you. Goodbye. Gone.
Now do that as Harry. You're doing.
Oh my God! Rick Kempfer, the ball was out of here. Rick Kempfer backwards is a Rambus Ramirez.
Well, have Rick Kempfer throwing the meatball. Have him be the pitcher.
Yeah, right. Rick Kempfer throws it, and it's gone. Sorry, Ricky, it's gone, buddy.
My sister could have hit that.
Buddy, sorry. So
yes.
So that all happens, and I got these pictures. This is the kind of stuff that kids live for when it comes to baseball. I have these pictures of my team, greeting me at home plate, and me and Gene Oliver, and I thought, this is just – and that's exactly why Randy created this, to make sure that men and women who enjoy the game could experience that just a little bit. So here's the topper. On Saturday, we go to Wrigley. That's the topper.
Right.
I pull in there. They let there's like 1,000 people there. You could have your family and friends. So like 1,000 people in Wrigley sitting behind home plate. And they gave us the visitor locker room. And I don't know what it's like now, but it was a shit show back then for this locker room. It was just like a closet.
Yeah, it was way in the back. There's like you had to go through these tunnels, and
Yes. There was like no heat, hardly any running water.
Yeah.
I thought, my God. So anyway, we do all that. And I got to tell you, I can't help but think of Field of Dreams, which is really the chapter I named. When I walked up on that field, man, it's one thing to sit at every right field, left field, center. I've sat in the owner's box and everywhere else, and to walk on that field was an anointing. I can't explain it.
Yeah. I'm totally jealous. Totally jealous.
We're going to edit this part out of the podcast because I'm not going to let it air. But so I used to be a season ticket holder with a bunch of guys for the Cubs. Yeah, I did it
as a money-making effort.
I totally did it. To
I'm sure.
But
Tax write-off somewhere.
Yeah.
But we would always have that one day where you can go to Wrigley, the picnic after the year's over. And even I, when you walk kind of up those steps and
I know.
It is, the green and I do believe Wrigley is one of the.
And as a Lane Tech boy, who went to the school right down the street, you'd think that you'd be a huge Cubs fan.
No, I was not, but maybe because of the passion that John's having, not you.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll turn.
So John,
if I can turn just one Lane Tech guy into something commonsensical from a Schurz guy, I've done my effing job.
Yeah.
But the big part of that was there was two pieces that were one was really funny and one was so touching to me. I you got to give me a little leeway here today. The first part was when I get there, they all know that I can hit the ball out of the park, and so I get up and they got Larry.
Let's be
Bittner.
honest, that's all they've been talking. That's all they've been talking about for 24 hours. I imagine.
Exactly.
Right?
I walk in there, they go, "There's the man right there." And
never seen a kid hit a ball like that.
Oh Jesus, it was God. So. The bread part, sometimes when I'm by myself, I'd slip into Harry Carey. There's like a support group for stuff like that. But
are you on your fourth or fifth marriage right now, John?
Exactly. Where's Dutchy? So to walk out there and they know I'm coming up, and here's Larry Bittner's pitching for them. And I don't get the chance to hit the third inning or whatever it was. And Larry Bittner's up there and Randy's catching, right? And I'm going, this is way too much for me. I'm standing at home plate with Hundley behind the plate. Larry Bittner's on the mound. The whole splay of Wrigley Field, before it was kind of full of billboards and stuff.
Yeah.
And Randy says, hold on, time out. And the ump calls time out. And they wave to the right field, and Rich Nye comes trotting in. And Rich Nye won, 18, 19, 20 games in 69. He's a left-hander with a hook that'll just kill you. They weren't going to let me anywhere near a baseball.
6'7". I met him. He's huge.
I know. So this guy comes trotting out to the mound, and I'm thinking, what's the point? I should just go back to,
Yeah.
So I think I fouled off 2 or 3 and eventually popped out. And, at the same time, Randy's untying my shoes and throwing dirt on my feet. And they didn't want me to get anywhere near a baseball. And afterwards, and at that game, Jimmy Pearsall was part of their lineup. And after the game at the dinner that he walks at me, and I'm not going to use all the language Pearsall used. He was quite colorful. But he basically said, listen, you big MFer, there's no MFing way. We're going to let MF and get anywhere near with the MF ball. So we got Rich Nye with his MF curveball to sit your MF and ass down. I said, well, thanks for the experience, Jim. I appreciate it.
I love it.
So, yeah, it was quite a thing.
All right. So where can people find this book?
So there's a couple ways to do it. The first way, the preferred way, is at lulu.com. It is a self-published effort. As much as, he's a name here in Chicago, I don't think I could have sold this to any press except maybe you guys.
Yeah.
And it's done pretty well. So that's Lulu, LULU.com. Just put Iron Man in the search bar. You can find it there. As I mentioned, I hope to have it out by June 1st or so, right around that time, on Amazon as an Audible book. And this bears serious mention. This book wouldn't exist in the form that it does without 110 Cub fans. So I needed about $10,000 to pull this off. I got to buy pictures. I got to do licensing and all kind of stuff. And, I wasn't going to have that come out of Randy's pocket. No way. So I had 100 Cub fans put in $100 or 110 or so. And for that, they got a copy of the book autographed to them. And they got their name is in the back of the book, or someone in memory of. And they got a chance to come to the book signing, or the book launch, I should say, in Chicago when it came out in 2023. And it was fantastic. We had over 400 Cub fans at La Villa Restaurant on the Northwest Side. Randy signed every book. They showered him with the love he deserves. And it was just a great thing. So lulu.com is where you can get the book and watch for it on Audible in June.
And it's called Iron Man. And it's the foreword is written by Ferguson Jenkins. Just a Hall of Famer. Nothing, no big whoop, right?
Yeah, it was a thing.
And I read it. I loved it. It's quite a. If you're a Cubs fan, let me just say this, Cubs fans, you're gonna love this book. So,
and even if you're a cynical White Sox fan, you can relive them.
Yes,
horror
unless
of
you're
19
Dave, who doesn't really experience joy in any way.
The 1969 team, in a lot of ways, has given me joy.
Okay, yeah.
So let's.
real quick, if I can, the thing
There's
about
no real
that I
quick.
learned
We can talk to you.
Oh, okay, great.
He's got a job.
Well, back in the day, yeah. So I learned so much doing this book. I am not a sports writer, and I told Randy that up front. This has been going back and forth for over a decade. I don't know why he waited till he was 80 to start doing this, but we'd gone back and forth a few times. And he calls me one day, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to be 80 soon, this and that." And we talked about that book thing. I said, "Yeah." He says, "I think it's time to start." I said, "Great, good luck." He said, "Well, I want you to write it." And I'm thinking, well, there's the Rick Kempers of the world, and these are sports guys, and there's 50 guys in this town that would love to write that book. And I said, call these guys. I'm a writer. I've done ghostwriting. I have 3 of my own books and all that stuff, but there's more qualified people. And he said, but I trust you.
Yeah.
And when he said that to me, that 10-year-old kid on the street corner, you guys, that was waiting for his autograph, I was done. I walked through walls for this guy. So it was a long process, a couple of years, basically a year and a half, 18 months, I suppose, to get this done. And we kind of rushed it. Because I wasn't quite frankly sure how his health would hold up. He's doing okay. We go out and try to hit some balls once a week and have lunch and goof off and just get him out. So he's doing okay. He'll be 83 soon, as I mentioned. But researching this book and going through the 60s again, which was a shit show and a half, I realized the pressure under the players back then to relieve some of the pressure of society. And he talked about that a lot, the whole assassination of MLK and how that affected his black teammates.
Yeah.
And all that was going on in Chicago in '60 with the Democratic National Convention and how difficult that was. And all these pieces in Vietnam on top of it. So I don't think there's been, maybe the 40s, but that was a war, that some of the stars of the 40s baseball players went and served and came back. This was more like the war, civil rights, the assassinations, you name it, recession, gas prices, all that was pushing at everybody. They needed an outlet. And on the northwest side of Chicago, that 69 team provided that outlet. And I think the big lesson was, even though they came up short, they gave us hope that something that out there was worth getting out of bed for in the morning. And I think to me, that was like the big aha as I went through all this stuff. The stats are great and it's a lot of work and all that stuff, but I came away with a greater respect for these guys for not just playing baseball, but playing a much bigger game that we all got a chance to be part of, whether we knew it or not.
I didn't even think about this until I read your book, but I mean, Randy grew up in Jim Crow South, right?
Yes.
I mean, and he had these black teammates who, were, in the middle of the civil rights movement. His nickname was Rebel. I mean,
I know.
So the fact that they ended up becoming friends and teammates, it kind of shows, the strength of that bond.
All right, screw it. I'm a Cubs fan.
We win.
Well, my God, it's taken 62 years, but
Rick, I've converted him within about 40 minutes. That's not too bad.
I think it's because he had that better Schurz education than the.
Well,
the other piece of this is that there was a time, I remember being in left field when they would wave that rebel flag out there when he got to the plate. You can't do that anymore. And I think the thing that he alluded to while we talked is he's never encouraged it or discouraged it. And part of that was he was proud of his heritage. And as the book points out, and as you pointed out, he had such distress over how in the world is it possible that he could be playing in a game, and during the game, the black teammates would be cheered for their on-field efforts, but when the game is over, they had to sleep somewhere else.
I know.
He did not get that. At all.
I don't get it either.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you very much for taking some time
this has
out
been
of
great.
your. This has been a very enjoyable interview, and we'll stay in touch. We live in Cubs land together.
Well,
yes, sir.
Rick and I are starting the Naked High School Swimming podcast coming up in a couple of weeks. So
when you're ready to cut a wake, give me a call.
We got to talk about your Schurz experience.
Yes.
So, hey, thanks, man. Really appreciate
Thanks,
it,
John.
and good luck to you.
We'll be in touch.
Thanks, fellas.
So
All right,
long.
see ya.
Bye-bye. And there he
That's
goes.
a good guy.
Isn't he a nice guy?
Right.
Yeah, that's John St. Augustine. You heard him on WGN. He's a broadcaster, and as he mentioned, a writer as well. And this story, I'm telling you, Cubs fans, if you're a fan of that 69 team, chock full of stories from that team. All right, Dave, we have people to thank.
Yeah, let's, certainly thank our guest, obviously, John St. Augustine. Thanks for coming in. Tony Lasano.
Yeah, also thanks to Randy Hundley for participating.
For catching 160 games a year at Wrigley Field.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's crazy. Tony Lasano, like I mentioned, our producer. Ed Silla, our distributor.
Right. And, I know that we already have a couple more guests booked, so we will be back again soon with another episode of
The New Schmidt Celebrity Interview.
The proceeding was a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Find our other great shows on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at RadioMisfits.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?